In the swamps of Louisiana, we find Tula, Swat, and Murk hiding in the shadows of the night. They're staring at a small, one-story house, its interior lit up. A beat-up pickup truck sits next to the house.
"It's called a truck," Swat says. "It's a land vehicle."
"I know what it's called," Murk says. "Truck is just a weird name. Everything up here is weird. Did you see that legged creature in the brush? It was covered in hair." Tula asks the most important question. "Swat, so do you know how to drive a truck?" He thinks so. He's read their instruction manual before. As they approach the vehicle, Tula holds her nose. "Oh, what is that terrible smell?"
"Processed fossil fuels," Swat says. "This machine runs on it."
Murk stares at the truck with disgust. "And the surface people wonder why we want them dead." Swat tells him to go around to the other side. He'll need the pilot's chamber. Murk opens the door a bit more forcefully than is necessary, tearing it off, and Swat chides him.
"Be quiet! You'll wake the humans in the dwelling."
He climbs inside and uses his electrical powers to activate the truck. With its motor rumbling, they head to Belle Reve Prison. "How far is it?" Tula asks. Confidently, Swat answers.
"We should be there in less than an hour."
Murk smiles. Then in less than an hour, the true King of Atlantis will be free. Meanwhile, in the exiled waters of Zebel, Aquaman floats before the seated frame of the dead king. The old man waves an arm, demanding that Aquaman return his trident and bow before him. When he doesn't, the dead king repeats his command. "Bow!" Arthur glares. "I think you're mistaking me for someone else." The dead king stares at him. "Are you not the king of Atlantis?" "Yes, I am Arthur Curry," our leading man says. "Leader of Atlantis and king of the seven seas." The dead king takes this in for a moment, his sunken eyes lost in shadow. He looks back up. "You are confused." "All right, help me understand then," Arthur says. "You're the first king of Atlantis? The dead king?" The old man seems to bristle at this. "They've stripped my name from the Atlantean tomes as well. What were you told about me?" Arthur runs down the story that Volko told him, that this guy was the first and greatest king of Atlantis. He forged the trident and several other artifacts of great power, which we saw in the Others arc. You were the leader of Atlantis until the day it sank. You rushed back into the city to save your family, but you never returned. You were caught in the destruction. You and your family died. The dead king looks up. His small eyes glow with bright blue light. "You were told some truth, and many lies." "Well, great. You can correct me as soon as you free Mera and the people of Zebel," Aquaman says. He concentrates, and we see rings signifying his telepathy emitting from his head. "Do it," he commands. "Now." A crowd of sharks circle the king. He glances at them, but he largely seems unconcerned. "You think your telepathy goes unnoticed by me? It was using your telepathy to announce your ascension that woke me." As the sharks close in, one of them bites the king's arm. He stabs his trident into it, freezing it. Another closes in, and he swings up the trident's bottom, blasting the shark with freezing cold air. "You claim to be the true king of Atlantis," he says. "You are not. You are a false king." He might be a false king, but he's got a pretty decent strategy on this one. While the king battles the sharks, Aquaman swims over to the ice block containing Mera and shatters it. He cradles her head, and she starts to wake. "She could hear his voice through the ice," she says. "He told her who he was and his connection to Zebel. He was going to tell her everything when Arthur broke her out." "Mera, I need you," Arthur says. "I need you awake and ready to fight." She looks past him and can see the king battling sharks. This steels her resolve. I am more than ready, Mera says. And in Atlantis, the Scavenger's fleet of submarines drops into the city and begins firing torpedoes. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.19 of Aquaman, King vs. King. All of the plot lines that author Geoff Johns has been building since issue 17 are coming to a head. Murk's team is heading to break Orm out, Arthur is dealing with the dead king in Xebel, and in a moment, we're going to catch up to the Scavenger's attack on Atlantis. Johns shows us these two opening scenes specifically, first with Murk and then with Arthur, to demonstrate why Atlantis is going undefended. You better buy a lotto ticket, Scavenger, because it's never going to get better than this for you. We don't get much more out of this opening scene otherwise. We do see more of Murk's racist distaste for the surface world. He thinks surface words are weird. He thinks surface animals are weird. He thinks humans should die because they burn fossil fuels. Which is extreme, but it is consistent with what we have seen regarding Murk so far. Given how fossil fuels are traditionally removed from the ocean, and how often those pipes leak and cause massive damaging oil spills, it makes sense that Murk hates the mere concept of them so strongly. Overall, for me, this is mostly a kind of funny scene. I love the way SWAT explains surface concepts. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Nathan Pyle's Strange Planet comic strips, but it feels a little bit like that. Referring to the driver's seat of a truck as the pilot's chamber made me crack up, to be quite honest. And Murk being disgusted by a dog? 'Cause it's covered in hair? Dogs are adorable! Like, I know it's simple comedy, and maybe it's a little bit dumb, but I still found it funny, and relatable, and understandable. I really like Tula and Murk being fish out of water, but it's a great contrast with how competent we have seen them be when they're more at home in their underwater environment. The lighter tone also gives us a moment of levity before things get serious thanks to the dead king and Scavenger's attack. There is a bit of discrepancy regarding Arthur's story compared to how it ended last issue. Issue 21 closed with Arthur being frozen, and here, he's totally fine. I'm assuming that the idea is that issue 21 ended with, like, the cold blast, like, coming for Arthur. And we, as the audience, the camera, were kind of looking through the blast, so it looked like Arthur got frozen. But he actually dodged at the last second, and he's actually fine. This is a bit odd to me, just because Geoff Johns doesn't really have an issue pick up where the last one left off, but with minor changes. All the issues we've seen so far have either had a time jump between issues or picked up pretty much right where the last issue left off. This is a very minor problem from a writing perspective, and reading the comic month to month, I probably wouldn't have picked up on this at all. Again, it's really only because I'm sitting down and reading these issues back to back to back to produce these episodes that this stands out to me. Anyways, this scene mostly recaps what Johns has told us before. All of Arthur's knowledge regarding the Old King is shared, and it's all stuff that we have seen in previous issues. This also helps to catch up new readers, who maybe haven't read the past 22 issues of Aquaman, or who have maybe forgotten what was in them. Remember, this information would have been sprinkled out over the course of 2 years of publication time, so it would have been pretty easy to forget, especially because you get one nugget about Atlantis in one story, then another nugget in another, and on and on. This opening is a pretty clever, natural way for Geoff Johns to establish Arthur's knowledge base while telling the audience what they need to know to continue in this story. I like that. But Arthur doesn't forget why he's here to begin with. The only reason that he even came to Xebel was to save Mera. So he does, utilizing his brain for perhaps the first time in this run. What a moment. I've been complaining that Arthur is a bit of a dumb idiot when it comes to how he solves his problems. So far, his most useful technique is punching them really hard. By using the sharks to distract the king, That's really smart. It demonstrates a sense of strategy that we really haven't seen from Arthur, and it makes sense for where he's at and the kind of powers that he have. It's just nicely done. I'm a little bit flabbergasted. Like, good for you, Johns, and good for you, Arthur. I like that. I also want to point out that Arthur does continue to narrate this opening scene, catching us up on how and why he is here. I didn't really include that in my retelling because we've been covering Aquaman for months now and we know how and why he's here. But the narration is still a feature to this arc. Johns introduced it back in issue 17 and it has shown up every issue in some capacity. I only bring it up because the previous 16 issues of this run did not have narration from Arthur, so Johns is using this more as a narrative tool to catch us up on things and reestablish information, either for use in the story or to contrast by revealing something that proves that earlier statement, Arthur's misconceptions, false. Especially stuff about Atlantis, given that the dead king is showing up. Arthur needs to go, this is what I think things are, and the dead king can go, nope, you're totally wrong, but the audience knows that because of your narration, so good work. Otherwise, this is a pretty solid opening to the comic. It's a little bit of fun, ramping up into the serious action pretty fast. In Atlantis, we see the Scavenger's fleet opening fire on the coral buildings of the city. Torpedoes streak through the water, causing explosions to rock the sea. We see Atlanteans fleeing, some of them riding large seahorses, others just swimming. A handful of the Scavenger's men have exited their subs and are armed with small harpoon guns. All of their outfits are very thin, like they look like your regular standard issue diving suit. The Scavenger's suit, though, looks unique, like an updated diving suit from like the 1960s. It's much more armored, complete with a metal diving helmet. Someone reports over their radio that there is no sign of Aquaman yet. As the Scavenger drops into the depths, he replies confidently that there will be. He orders the surveyors to scan the city so that they can upload that information to Central Command. He wants a map. But he also warns his people that the Atlanteans will not hesitate to kill them, so they should do what they have to do. We do indeed see Atlanteans fighting back, easily pulling off the divers' helmets. We do also see the Scavenger's men killing them in retaliation. The Scavenger's suit, though, is equipped with an electrical defense system, shocking any Atlanteans who attempt to touch him. He also has his own harpoon gun, which he does not hesitate to use. The scans finally finish, allowing the Scavenger to see the city through his heads-up display. He's found the throne room, and he heads for it. As this chaos is going on, down in the depths of the city, guards rush to secure the cells. One of them suspects that this could be a breakout attempt, but an explosion catches them. And while it might have been an accident, that blast does indeed free Volko. As he swims out into the open, Volko has to ask, "Where is King Arthur?" A punch suddenly catches him by surprise as a guard closes in. Another tries to stop him, arguing that they need to help the city. But this guy is ready to kill Volko. King Arthur will never execute his advisor, but I will. Until Ern grabs his arm, twisting it back. Ah! He berates the guard. Atlantis is under attack, he says, and that needs to be their focus. He orders them to sink those subs however they can. Volko thanks Warden Ern, who grabs him by the arm. I didn't spare your life for you. Atlantean law decrees that only the king may sentence someone to death, and Ern will uphold that law until his dying day. Which might be today. Ern throws Volko back into his cell, turns around, and shoots out, back into the conflict. Wow. Ern, you're stealing my heart here, man. What an absolute badass. This scene is pretty straightforward, but it is still a good one. Ern is one of 3 Atlantean characters that we have gotten to know by name, the other 2 being Murk and Tula. I'm not counting SWAT because we kind of just met him. Both of those characters, by the way, Murk and Tula, are supposed to support Arthur, as Atlantean law dictates, but we have seen them abandon their post and go to rescue Orm instead. If they were willing to do that, if they were willing to break Atlantean law, then who knows who else might be willing. And here we see that Ern is not. He might be old, and his faith in Arthur might be misplaced, but he will make sure that those laws are followed for as long as he is alive. That's just cool to see. Ern is armed with weapons, by the way, although I don't honestly know what they're called. They've got a handle, right? And a C-shaped blade. No, a D-shaped blade, actually. Like, they look like if you hold a straight part of the letter D, and the curved part is a jagged, spiked edge. It looks like it's maybe made of coral or shell. It's a little bit hard to read, honestly. He has one in each hand, and as he swims off to fight the Scavenger's men, it feels like he's going to do some work. But we also see that Volko can still escape, really. Ern threw him back into a cell, sure, but that doesn't mean that he's going to stay there. He's shown before that he is willing to break laws and kill people, if that means achieving his goals. And maybe today that goal is saving Atlantis? Maybe it means finding King Arthur and helping him to resolve this threat. I guess we'll see. In Zebel, Aquaman and Mera have retreated to the debris field of sunken ships. If this guy really is the first king of Atlantis, then he must be my ancestor, Arthur reasons. But if he is, how did he live this long? How did he turn into that? And why is he in Zebel instead of Atlantis? What the hell does this guy want? Not that far behind them is the dead king.
I can hear you,
he growls. Aquaman turns to Mera. Can you control his ice? Break it open, free your people? Mera nods, if he was distracted. Concentrating, Aquaman scans a nearby boat with his telepathy. It's clear. Good. What are you going to do? Mera asks. Aquaman picks up the boat. I'm going to distract him, Aquaman says. The dead king looks up when he hears Arthur say, So it's king versus king, huh? Let's see who bows first, old man. And then he drives an entire ship into the dead king in a nice 2-page spread. The king pushes through, though, shrugging off the aged metal like it was paper. He gestures towards Aquaman, sending ice shards flying at him. He dodges, of course. So what? You came out of retirement to give me tips? Swinging his trident in, the dead king closes the gap between them.
This is the first time you've been to Zebel,
he rasps. Aquaman now returns fire, pressing in with his trident, but the king blocks it with an ice shield.
And you nearly annihilated the trench. You know nothing of a king's responsibilities.
Out of nowhere, the king lands a punch.
Because you know nothing of who you really are.
And a left punch. Oh, Aquaman is sent flying. He is knocked back through several wrecked heaps. What a fight, ladies and gentlemen. Mera hears all this commotion and she worries about Arthur, but she also has a job to do. Mera returns to her people and gestures, shattering the ice. Nereus is among the first out and she reaches for him. Nereus, I need your help, she says. You and your people. That makes him pause. My people? Our people, Mera corrects, tugging at his arm. The dead king. Nereus cuts her off. I know, Mera. The ice told us all about him. It told us everything. Back at the fight, Aquaman is punching through a massive column of ice that the king is sending his way.
You are not my descendant, Arthur. You are not of royal blood.
Mera, Nereus, and their people swim towards the fight. Whoever this guy is, Mera says, we need to stop him. In Atlantis, the Scavenger floats down towards the throne. This is it, he says. This is Arthur's throne room.
Your ancestors stole my throne,
the dead king says. Spears of ice pierce Arthur's shoulders and left side. He screams in pain.
No! Your ancestors murdered my family with my trident, the king says. In truth, you are what you know. Nothing.
In Atlantis, the Scavenger sits down on the throne. One of its men asks where Aquaman is in all of this, but the Scavenger doesn't care. As long as he sits on the throne of Atlantis, it is his. On the surface, Murk's group stands just outside the metal fence surrounding Belle Reve prison. Orm is in there? Murk asks. SWAT answers simply.
Yes.
Mera and her group have finally reached the fight. She warns the king to move away from Arthur. You might have caught them off guard before, but now they're ready for him, she says.
Oh, they are. I believe you stand alone, Queen of Zebel.
Mera turns to look behind her. Yes, she does, Nereus said, his head bowed to the dead king. Nereus, what are you doing? Mera asks. Our loyalty, he replies, is to the one true king of the seven seas. The people of Zebel bow to the dead king. So there are a couple things here that I think are super interesting. First off, the dead king can communicate through his ice. It's like ice-based telepathy. When you're inside of that ice, he seems to be able to speak to your mind. Mera's dialogue when Arthur freed her hinted at this idea, but in the moment it was actually pretty easy to miss. I honestly thought that she was telling Arthur that she heard the conversation between him and the dead king, but clearly now that is definitely not the case. But just because he tells you these things, that doesn't mean that they're true. As a longtime X-fan, I have read a ton of stories about telepathy and planting suggestions and brainwashing and mind control. Is the dead king telling the truth here, or is he planting a story inside the heads of the people of Zebel? If he had finished telling Mera the truth, would she also be loyal to him now? Is she only defiant because Arthur released her in time? Clearly we'll find out next issue. But it's still a cool thought to have, and it's still a problem right now. Secondly, we've got the Scavenger claiming the throne of Atlantis. This is one of those moments that's really tricky as a reader because I don't feel like I know enough about Atlantis to know if this guy's got the concept right or not. The idea that you get to rule because your butt is in the correct chair seems absolutely ridiculous to me, but Scavenger seems pretty confident that he's got this one on lock. Why he would know this? Man, I have no idea. How did Dr. Shin know so much about Atlantis when no one else in the world even believed that it was real? No clue. How does the Scavenger have a master's degree in Atlantean law when no one believed it was real? Also no clue. But if he is right, I mean, that's a hell of a power play. When Ern and the Atlanteans make it to the throne room, do they kill this human, or do they obey their new king? Because if the Scavenger is right and sitting on the throne makes you king, then John's just demonstrated that Ern will obey Atlantean law, even if he disagrees with it. And Ern is one of the few people still in Atlantis that we know, so from a narrative perspective, it makes sense for him to show up to confront this invader first. Finally, we have the ending. The people of Zebel bowing to the dead king is fine, like, these people were positioned as bad guys who hated Aquaman anyways. I came into this story believing that the Zebel people were a threat, and now they are, they just have a different leader than expected. No, what's noteworthy is the storytelling happening here. When the dead king tells Arthur that he isn't his descendant, the icicles stab into him like the truth stabbed into him. That's amazing! And I would argue that those icicle things are definitely meant to be a physical metaphor, because we've seen Arthur shrug off bullets. He's gone fist to fist with Superman and Wonder Woman. Aquaman is a physically tough dude, but you're going to try and tell me that flooping ice can pierce that armored skin with the chainmail on? Please, come on. What really pierced Arthur was the dead king telling him that what he feared all along is true, that Atlantis isn't his home. When the king says that Arthur is really nothing, we see a close-up reaction shot of Arthur's face, all shocked Pikachu, and he is surrounded by shattered pieces of ice. Those pieces of ice all have reflections of Arthur on them. It's as if Arthur's sense of self has been shattered. All of this ice floating around isn't what's really causing him harm. Arthur's going to shrug off those wounds, no problem. It's the emotional damage that he's taken that is really the problem here, hitting Arthur right where he's weakest. Remember, Back in the Zero issue, before Arthur found Volko, he began to think that the Atlantis story that his dad told him was fake. That maybe it was just a cute lie that he told his kid so that he had something magical to believe in regarding where his mom went. And that issue specifically references the existence of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, if I remember correctly, for the first time, other than just calling them the Justice League. Johns was saying to the audience, hey, there are other superpowered people out there, and they've got no connection to Atlantis. It makes it plausible in Arthur's mind that neither does he. We see this fear of not fitting in again during the Throne of Atlantis, when Aquaman tells Batman that the League is the only place that he feels welcome. Arthur knows, unequivocally, thanks to his past, that the surface world doesn't want him. He started out this volume of the comic believing that Atlantis didn't want him either. And then here comes the Dead King, this walking, talking tome of ancient knowledge showing up to flooping confirm Arthur's worst fears. That he has no home. That he isn't a king. And Arthur said during the Others arc that he considers Aquaman a lie. That he isn't a hero, so he doesn't even have that. Arthur has nothing and is no one. And the only person who stands beside him is Mera. But how can two people stand against an entire nation? I guess we'll find out. And that's pretty good stakes for a story. I also really like this multi-tiered exploration of leadership that Johns has set up as well. Arthur took the throne of Atlantis in order to protect the surface world from Atlantis and to protect Atlantis from the surface world. Neither of these groups wants Arthur as a leader, but he means the best and wants the best for both. He's reluctant to take or use the power of his position, and as such, he's probably the less likely person to abuse it. But then we have the Dead King, who represents old Atlantis. He might be the first king for realsies, and if he is, he has more of a claim to Atlantis than anyone. But is he the best choice for everyone? He's callously murdered over a dozen humans. He may have potentially brainwashed the people of Zebel. We know that Atlantean laws and customs are particularly brutal, and this is the guy who wrote those laws. He might be the more historically accurate king of Atlantis, but that doesn't make him the best king for modern times. Conversely, we have Scavenger throwing his helmet into the ring. A guy who has no connection to Atlantis at all. A human who is taking advantage of old laws in order to gain power. He is also callous, disinterested in the deaths of his own men. He is willing to kill and torture Atlanteans to get what he wants, and now he invades their city, blows up their homes, kills some of them. And what, he expects them to obey? This guy is the Dead King, but in reverse. The Dead King and the Scavenger represent the worst possible options of Arthur's rule. One that is totally Atlantean-focused, and one that is totally human-focused. Both of them are destructive, both of them will cost people their lives, and the best answer to those problems, that's still our boy Artie. If he can fight them both back. All I know is that Scavenger better hope that Aquaman gets to him first, because I do not see the Dead King giving him a chance to bend a knee before freezing him into little ice cubes. Although I do love the idea of Scavenger, like, sitting all high and mighty on that throne, expecting his old, honorable enemy Aquaman to show up, and then the Dead King walks into the throne room instead and Sub-Zero's his butt. Like, I just serve him right. I like that. Issue 23 opens with Aquaman and Mera fleeing. Not far behind them are Nereus and the colony of Zebel. As they duck and swerve around and under the wrecked ships that litter the ocean bottom, Arthur asks how they can leave Zebel. They need to sink a ship to get in. What about get out? No one leaves without the king's authority, Mera says. That's the guy with the red beard? He asks. No, that's Nereus. Mera's father was the king. Nereus is one of Zebel's greatest warriors. Mera's father promised her to him. And what does that mean? Mera says, I was to be his queen when I returned from Atlantis. Arthur nods. So we have a lot to talk about after we get away from all this. Mera pushes ahead of him, activating her hydrokinesis. She inherited her dad's power, so she can open the portal for them to escape. But Nereus inherited those powers too. While she is trying to open the portal, he'll be trying to keep it closed. As Nereus and his forces close in, someone shouts that they're about to escape! Nereus concentrates, and his eyes glow blue. They will be contained. Mera is my queen! A pulse of water erupts from Nereus, washing Aquaman and Mera away from the portal. Mera gestures in return, scattering the Zebel forces with her own push of water. Head to the surface, Arthur, now! The pair of them swim up. Is the field going to be down? Arthur asks. It will be, Mera assures him. Don't slow down. Trust me, Arthur. As they reach the surface, a pool seems to open up inside the water. They seem to slam into it, and then they're through. The pair shoot through a sheet of ice, bursting into the middle of a raging oceanic storm. Lightning flashes in the sky, but it only lasts for a moment. The pair fall back into the water. I do trust you, Mera, Arthur says once they're comfortable, but you need to trust me too. Whatever happened in your past, whatever you think you can't tell me because you're afraid it'll change how I feel about you, you need to get over it quickly. I love you, he says, no matter what. The pair share a kiss before turning their attention to the dark depths below. How long will the field hold them? Arthur asks. Not long enough, Mera replies. Then we need to go to Atlantis. Mera doesn't like that. The Atlanteans will kill her on sight. But Aquaman is sure of this course. The dead king seems to know things that they don't, and the only way to fix this discrepancy in intel is to get to Volko. Atlantis will respect Mera as their queen just as much as they respect him as their king. If there's one thing that Arthur can trust about Atlantis, it's that they follow their laws. And then we transition over to the group breaking those laws. Murk, Tula, and SWAT. That's an excellent transition. And an ironic one to boot. I like it, Mr. Johns. I like it a lot. This opening scene is exciting enough, and the dialogue between Arthur and Mera catches the reader up on what is going on pretty well. It also demonstrates that while Arthur might not understand everything about Mera's past, he is more than willing to listen to her and give her the benefit of the doubt. He loves her, and if I remember correctly, this is the first time that he says that he loves her, which is kind of amazing. And whatever revelations about her might come to light, he's going to stay by her side. That's just super sweet. I really appreciate that Johns isn't going the jealous lover route and have, Arthur get nervous about Nereus entering their lives or anything like that. Mera has pretty clearly staked her interest in Arthur. She has stayed with him instead of going home after all this time, when she really could have just gone home when she felt like it. The only real problem that I have is the idea that Mera's hydrokinesis seems to be an inherited ability. She says that she got it from her father. But Nereus also has hydrokinesis, which seems to imply a genetic link between Nereus and Mera's father, and thus maybe Mera? I know that Zebel is an Atlantean penal colony, so the gene pool can only be so big, but still, is Johns implying that these two are related? Like maybe they're distant cousins or something like that? I hope not. Anyways, in Louisiana, we jump over to Murk's group. The big man is watching an alligator eat a heron. Whew, sorry, Ethan. While Tula and SWAT examine the building. SWAT believes that,
given his crimes, Orm will probably be imprisoned in the highest security wing,
which he points out. Murk steps up to the fence. So we break it open. Tula glares at him. And unleash dangerous criminals that have been imprisoned? Or potentially harm Orm in the process? No, she says. We need to do this stealthily. Okay, fine. That's what the drift does, Murk argues. So Tula goes in first, kills the guards, and she interrupts him, turning to SWAT. How many guards should we expect? SWAT figures at least a dozen. So you expect me to kill a dozen humans? Tula asks. Yes, Murk says. King Orm is worth hundreds of humans' lives. And then what, Murk? Tula asks. We kill a dozen humans, we break out Orm, and the surface retaliates? What, we go to war again? Murk is fine with that outcome. It's going to come to that anyway. Swat holds up his webbed hands.
Will you two stop shouting?
Murk steps up to Tula. We have walked across toxic landscape for hours. You agreed to do this. You want Orm freed as much as I do. Atlantis needs its king, and this is not the time for second thoughts.
At least be honest with her, Swat says. Tell her why you have such a disdain for humans.
And now the big guy turns on Swat. Say a word, and I will expose your secret affair with the surface world to all of Atlantis. You think you feel shame now because you can't breathe underwater. Wait until Atlantis knows about your trophy room. We do this, he says, turning back to his other compatriot. Either you do it quietly, Tula, or I'll do it loudly. He stops arguing, though. A watery voice contacts Tula. It's the same type of word balloon that we saw in Swat's place. It's her squad leader, Tula reports. Atlantis is under attack. We see a single image of Orm sitting in the darkness of his cell. And then we get a shot of the prison. Murk, Tula, and Swat look tiny in comparison.
So,
Swat asks,
what do we do?
That's what it comes down to, isn't it? What's more important? Freeing Orm and potentially saving his life? Or returning to Atlantis and saving all the lives therein and fulfilling their duties? As leader of the Men-at-Arms, Murk is a member of the Atlantean military. Tula is the leader of the Drift, Atlantis' cadre of stealth operatives. They should be defending Atlantis from the Scavenger right now. While these characters are definitely acting as foils to Aquaman's story, I really appreciate John's giving them their own little story arc within that role and the greater narrative going on in this comic. These characters are challenging Arthur's rule as king. Sure, they're challenging the surface world's authority to hold Orm, their beloved king, and their absence from Atlantis is going to make things worse all around. But then John presents them with a chance to set things right. What is more important to them? Doing what they want and saving Orm? Or fulfilling their duty and saving a greater amount of lives in Atlantis, even if it means letting Orm die? These characters don't know it, but they have been put in the same position that King Arthur is in. Does he let a loved one sit in prison and maybe get killed if it means keeping the United States government from retaliating against Atlantis itself? Do they, when faced with that choice? Will their decisions grant them greater sympathy with Arthur? Or will it make them hate him more? We have seen Murk utterly fail to sympathize with others once before, so this doesn't bode well for him, but you never know. In Atlantis, we find Ern leading the pushback against the Scavenger's subs. One of his men asks, "Where's the king? Has he abandoned us already?" But Aquaman races into the scene, bowling through a horde of Scavenger's men. Ern smiles. "Never," he says confidently. Mera fights back as well, using her hydrokinesis to force the humans back. An Atlantean warrior, saved by the action, raises his gun at her, warning the Zebel warrior to stay back. Ern swims right up into his face, shouting, "She is the king's queen, and she just saved your asses. Now shut up and fight."
No swearing.
Good for you, Ern. Behind him, we can just barely see Mera smiling at the backup. We know that she wasn't expecting acceptance or understanding from Atlantis in any capacity, and this must honestly be refreshing. Ern is like my new favorite side character in this comic. In the throne room, the Scavenger says that Aquaman is home. He orders someone to prepare the shredder. Once it's ready, he gives the command to fire. At the battlefield, one of the subs launches a torpedo, and it streaks towards Aquaman. Ern gasps. And suddenly I understand why John's made Ern so likable. No. Ern bursts through the water, intercepting the torpedo. It explodes in his back and tears him apart. Arthur cradles some of his body, but it's too late. Ern is dead. The Atlantean soldiers gather around him. King Arthur? What now? What do we do? Aquaman admits that there are too many subs. They need to fall back. One of the soldiers hesitates. Fall back? I am your king, and you will start listening to me, Aquaman shouts, all of his frustrations coming to bear. Fall back now! As they do, we see inside one of the submarines. They confirm that Aquaman was not hit by the Shredder, but the Atlanteans are retreating. Ha! Cowards! But the Scavenger hasn't moved yet. What is he doing? He asks, referring to Aquaman. Aquaman waits until his people are clear, and then he begins to concentrate. Concentric circles of his telepathy ring out from his mind. Far below, Volko looks up and smiles. The king, he's returned. Aquaman grits his teeth. Blood erupts from his nose. Come on, damn you! From the sea floor, a burst of bubbles rise up. The ground shakes. Inside the submarine, they see it on radar first. Oh my god. One of them whispers. What is it? Scavenger asks. Topo rises from the depths, its massive mouth open, its mandibles clacking. Tentacles so big that they dwarf the submarines, wrap around them, and they begin to crush them. Mera swims next to Arthur, warning him to stop. But Arthur can't quit yet. Topo has to listen to him. He has to. Another sub is crushed. Aquaman sinks to his knees, his concentration slipping. A stray tentacle brushes the castle, and the throne room caves in. We see several of the Scavenger's men escape, but there's no sign of the man himself. His head reeling, the pain clear in his eyes, Aquaman and Mera look at the dead king as he arrives.
At long last,
the old man says,
the seven seas will be mine.
He raises his trident, and in his other hand is Arthur's. The people of Zebel charge from behind him. Aquaman blacks out. Arthur! Mera shouts, reaching for him. Take my hand! Take my... And then he's gone. When the darkness begins to finally fade, the face that greets Arthur isn't Mera's. It's Volko's. The old man smiles warmly, happy to see the king awake. We're in some kind of tent, and Volko is wearing human clothing. Arthur grabs him by the coat collar, hauling him near. Volko! Where am I? What the hell is going on? He demands. Arthur releases Volko, and he falls back. My king, he says, you've been unconscious for 6 months. We finally see Arthur's body. His old wounds from the icicles are wrapped and bandaged. Scars and scratches litter his bare torso. His hair is definitely longer, and he has a short, well-trimmed beard. His pants are torn and holey. Behind Volko on the wall, we can see a paper map of the world. Several areas of the ocean are circled as if they are hotspots in a conflict. Oh, and we are very clearly on the surface. A 6-month gap. We have a 6-month gap? We've got a 6-month gap? Okay, that's a problem for me, but we'll get into why it's a problem in a second. I've got a job to do first. Let's just finish breaking down the issue. As I mentioned before, Johns did a great job of making Ern a likable, heroic character. Hooray for him. He honors his duty to defend Volko when we know that he wants the man to face justice. He makes sure that the other soldiers are focused on fighting off the invasion rather than engaging in their own selfish wants, like killing Volko, or their own potential racism against Zebel, like when Ern defended Mera. Everything about this character is about doing the right thing, even if it comes at a personal cost. This ethos climaxes in Ern sacrificing his life to save Arthur. We know that Arthur has a history with people dying, quote unquote, because of him. And we know that he hates it. So I can't see him taking Ern's death very well once he actually has time to process it. And I suppose that Topo probably could have been that emotional reaction too. When Johns first introduced Topo, he established two main things about the creature. The first was that Topo was so ancient, its mind so well developed, that it was beyond even the king's ability to command. The second was that Topo, for whatever reason, had no interest in helping Arthur hunt down the Scavenger. These two things were set up so that Johns could pay them off here. In desperation to save his people, maybe to avenge Ern, who knows, Arthur is able to control Topo, but I would argue barely and only for a short time. It clearly took a toll on him, demonstrated by his bleeding nose, and time spent in a recuperative coma. Doing such a thing wasn't easy, and Topo appears to fight back while he is attempting to do it, destroying the submarines kind of casually. Remember, when Arthur first spoke to Topo, he asked for it to hunt down the Scavenger and restrain the submarines. He didn't want them destroyed because he was afraid that the humans inside those subs would die. Here, Topo doesn't restrain shit.
No swearing.
It just goes for it, tearing the subs in half, crushing them like an empty plastic water bottle. There is absolutely no attempt at preserving human life, and I would argue that is Topo's will overpowering Arthur's. Aquaman summoned Topo for help, but Topo wanted blood. The creature's motives are fairly impossible to guess at, unfortunately, as we just don't know anything about it otherwise. I will say that I think it's bad news that Topo gets drawn into this conflict right when the dead king shows up with his army. The king hasn't really demonstrated an ability to communicate with sea life yet. He fought the sharks that Arthur sicked on him, and he needed the scepter in order to control the trench, after all. But maybe he just hasn't used the ability up to this point. Topo certainly looks like an ancient being. Maybe it's been alive since the dead king's last time on the throne. If so, it might like this guy. It might even obey him. I guess we'll see when we get to it. And this is why we have a 6-month gap. Johns has set up a lot of plot threads right now, and they are all intertwined. The dead king wants his throne back, the Zebels want revenge against Atlantis, Nereus wants his queen, Orm is imprisoned, Tula, Murk, and Swat are out of town, Ern is dead, Volko is free. That's just a lot. And the scale of all of that storytelling is just kind of too big for a modern monthly comic book. Like, it's pretty clear that the dead king has probably swooped in and retaken the throne, taking advantage of the damage done by the Scavenger. Even if Arthur didn't go into that coma, that is one hell of a force to have to fight back against. That turns Aquaman from an ongoing superhero comic into a, long-term fantasy war comic? Which, don't get me wrong, I personally would be here for. But clearly, author Jeff Johns is not. How long would it take to explore a status quo of Atlantean civil war between the entrenched dead king over in Atlantis, backed up by native Atlanteans and Zebels and his ice, and then Arthur on the run with a group of unlikely allies? That kind of story could take years. Like, that's a whole series. As much as I wouldn't mind that, that is kind of a big risk to take from a storytelling perspective. I previously mentioned that DC did try to do Aquaman like an epic fantasy quest comic back in 2006, and it didn't work very well from a sales perspective. Nobody really liked it. Even now, nobody seems to have really liked it. Johns has really been balancing superheroics adventure elements and fantasy elements really well in this run up to this point. But the dead king taking over Atlantis, that would make the book just dive into its fantasy background, and that just might not work for some. That could lead to a huge dip in sales and potentially lead to the cancellation of the book. It happened before. So, this 6-month gap is going to work as a story shortcut. While Arthur is out cold, the status quo of Atlantis will change, allowing the Dead King story to move forward without Arthur challenging it. This will create a more established, more easily understandable level of threat for Arthur to face, and probably defeat when he takes up the fight again. This storytelling shorthand is really critical to Johns' story right now, because it's about to end. We have only 4 issues left of Geoff Johns' run on Aquaman. He's just running out of time, and he's got a story to tell. This is where I have a problem with this 6-month gap. As firmly established in this podcast, Geoff Johns was also writing, at the time, Justice League of America, overseeing the massive Forever Evil crossover event while writing the main miniseries for it, and he was writing Aquaman, Green Lantern, and the Batman Earth 1 graphic novel during this time. He was simply doing a lot of work. This is why issue 21 ended up being a fill-in issue, and it's ultimately why Geoff Johns is stepping away from the character. But Aquaman continues to be a member of the Justice League. After the Trinity War crossover, which ends with the beginning of Forever Evil, the Justice League are captured by a group of bad guys from an evil alternate Earth called the Crime Syndicate. The Crime Syndicate is literally the Justice League, but evil, and they were looking for a new world to take over, and guess what? They picked this one. They surprise the Justice League, capture them all, and declare to the world that the Justice League is dead. When they do so, they present tokens of the League. Wonder Woman's lasso, Superman's cape, Aquaman's trident. But Ben, you say, surely one of these stories simply happens before the other one happens. Maybe Trinity War / Forever Evil story elements play out before Aquaman's defeat here and his 6-month coma. Well, I wish it were that simple, because our next episode will be covering DC's Villains Month. When the Syndicate took over Earth, they allied with as many superpowered bad guys as they could. Much like with the Zero issue, celebrating a year of publishing the New 52, Villains Month spun out of the events of Forever Evil. The bad guys had won, and so every title was temporarily taken over by the villains from it, with point issues. For example, we'll be covering Aquaman issue 23.1 and 23.2 in the next episode. These stories are in canon, and they are plotted by Geoff Johns, and they do have an impact on the DC universe, specifically on the events of Forever Evil. Black Manta actually plays a big role in the story of Forever Evil. I would kind of argue that he's one of the main characters. So Aquaman must simultaneously somehow be resting in a coma while also being trapped by the Syndicate. There is no way for me to reason out how this works or to figure out a clever solution for it. It's just messy storytelling, probably a symptom of Johns' overwork, in my opinion, as his previous crossover was pretty well balanced and scheduled. This isn't really a bad thing as a reader of Aquaman, to be quite fair. If you are reading Aquaman at the time and you don't read Justice League and you don't want to read these point issues, then you just skip the Villains Month issues and keep on reading, baby! For me, though, that's just not my style, man. Johns has made me care about Black Manta and Orm. I can't just abandon their stories now. So next time, we pick up Black Manta's story. He's in prison, Waller wants him for the Suicide Squad, and suddenly the crime syndicate strikes, and everything changes. To say that this alters the path that Black Manta is on is no small thing. Orm also benefits from the Syndicate's attack, finding himself loose in a world that he does not know, or honestly, even like. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.20 of Aquaman, Changing Tides. And hopefully my voice is recovered from that screaming bit. I did not think I would be this hoarse. Wish me luck. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.